The smell of smoke greeted me before the doorknob turned warm beneath my palm. Morning sunlight spilled across the farmhouse porch, but the air carried a bitter sting that raised the tiny hairs on my arms. I kicked off my running shoes and sprinted down the hallway, the old floorboards groaning beneath me. The parlor was a haze of gray. In the center stood my mother's cedar chest, its once polished surface now blackened and smoldering, the lid cracked like a broken jaw. The familiar lavender scent that used to drift from the chest was replaced by scorched wood and something sharp, like burned sugar. Evelyn stood over it, fireplace poker in hand, her silk robe shining as though nothing around her was wrong. "What did you do?" My voice cracked, the question tasting like metal in my throat. She raised one sculpted brow. "Freed you from that sentimental clutter. Time to live in the present, Lucy." I stumbled forward, coughing against the acrid smoke. The chest held every letter Mom ever wrote to me. Birthday cards, small notes of advice, scraps of her laugh and wisdom. My heart pounded. "You burned them?" "They were just scraps of paper," she said, turning away as if the conversation bored her. "Your mother wouldn't want you trapped in the past." Her words stabbed deeper than the smell of smoke. I dropped to my knees, sifting through ashes with shaking fingers, searching for anything. Any word, any trace of Mom. The fire hissed softly, a cruel whisper of finality. Evelyn left without a backward glance. Only the sharp trail of her perfume lingered. I sat on the floor until the sun climbed high, the cedar scent of ruin clinging to my hair and clothes. All that remained of my mother's handwriting, her voice, were gray flakes and twisted metal hinges. When Evelyn finally returned, she looked as composed as if she'd been out shopping. "You'll thank me one day," she said lightly. "You need to stop clinging to ghosts." I wanted to scream, but something inside me hardened instead. Grief cooled into a slow, steady fury. "You had no right," I whispered. "Rights." She tilted her head, the smile never touching her eyes. "This is our home. Your father and I decide what stays." Our home. The words curdled in my stomach. I gathered the tiniest fragments of charred paper into a small tin box. Maybe something could be saved, even if it was only dust. As she swept out again, the sharp sweetness of her perfume lingered like a warning. I promised myself I would not forget this moment. Ever. Night settled over the farmhouse like a heavy quilt. When the house was finally silent, I crept downstairs with a flashlight. The floorboards creaked softly, the sound of old wood remembering every step. Kneeling by the ruined chest, I sifted through ashes again. My fingers came away black, but a faint glimmer caught the beam of light. A corner of paper, edges blackened but not fully burned. I held my breath and lifted it carefully. It was a scrap of my mother's handwriting. Only a few words survived, blurred but unmistakable. "Truth waits, love endures." My throat tightened. Mom's voice, small but alive, had survived fire and malice. Maybe more had. Maybe she'd hidden something Evelyn hadn't found. I tucked the fragment into my journal. For the first time since the fire, a thin spark of hope flickered. The next afternoon, as I passed the kitchen, Evelyn's voice floated through the half-closed door. "Yes, once the house is fully in my name, we can list it," she said, low but clear. "I've already cleared the sentimental clutter." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. She was planning to sell the farmhouse, Mom's farmhouse, as soon as she could. I backed away, careful to avoid the creaky board near the pantry. Questions swirled. Did Dad know? Could the deed even allow her to sell? By the time Evelyn ended her call, I was already outside, cold autumn air biting at my cheeks. Betrayal burned hotter than the ashes in the parlor. That evening, memory tugged me toward the attic. Mom had loved riddles and hidden surprises, always slipping little notes into unlikely places. The attic smelled of dry wood and old summers. Dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight as I opened boxes of quilts and yellowed photo albums. On a high shelf rested the family Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by decades of hands. Mom used to tuck messages inside during Sunday readings. I opened it with a racing heart. Empty. My stomach sank. But as I closed the book, a pressed flower drifted to the floor. Faint handwriting curved along its brittle stem. Box 12. I held the fragile petals carefully. Box 12. Another clue. Another chance to hear my mother's voice. For the first time since the fire, a quiet thrill replaced my grief. The game wasn't over. Mom had left me a trail. The following morning broke gray and cool, the kind of New England day when the clouds press low enough to touch the treetops. I slipped the brittle pressed flower into an envelope and drove the winding road into town, my old sedan rattling over each frost-heaved bump. The scent of damp leaves and the faint tang of wood smoke clung to the air, wrapping the landscape in a quiet that felt both mournful and expectant. Mr. Collins's law office sat in a converted brick house with green shutters and a brass bell that chimed softly when I opened the door. Inside, the warmth of cedar polish and paper greeted me, a comforting counterpoint to the cold swirl of thoughts in my head. He looked up from his desk, glasses perched halfway down his nose. "Lucy Whitman," he said with a small welcoming smile. "It's been too long. How's the farmhouse treating you?" I managed a thin smile as I settled into the leather chair opposite him. "That's complicated," I admitted, and then the words spilled out. The acrid smoke that woke me, Evelyn standing over the burning cedar chest, the discovery of the pressed flower marked box 12. As I spoke, Mr. Collins's genial expression hardened. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Your mother was one of the most deliberate people I knew," he said slowly. "If she left you clues, she meant for you to find them. And if someone destroyed her personal belongings intentionally, that's serious." He turned to a tall cabinet, riffling through files until he pulled out a thick folder embossed with the Whitman name. "Here," he said, flipping pages with practiced ease. "Your mother's will and the farmhouse deed. Listen to this. All personal effects of Clara Whitman shall pass solely to her daughter, Lucy Whitman, and shall not be sold, transferred, or destroyed without her express consent." I felt a jolt, part outrage, part vindication. So if Evelyn burned those letters on purpose, it could be considered interference with your inheritance, he finished, his voice tightening. "At the very least, it's legally significant. Do you have any proof? Photos of the chest, the ashes?" "I took a few pictures," I said. My phone suddenly felt like a lifeline in my pocket. "Good. Keep everything. Photos, that flower, any fragments of the letters, in a safe place. And if you uncover more, bring it straight here." His gaze softened. "Lucy, your mother loved you fiercely. I believe she's still guiding you." A quiet strength settled inside me, steadier than anger. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. I'll be careful." Outside, the chill bit at my cheeks, but I felt strangely warm. Evelyn thought she had silenced Mom's voice with fire. She had no idea Mom had already planned for every flame. Back at the farmhouse, late autumn light slanted through the tall windows, throwing long gold stripes across the hallway. The smell of scorched cedar still lingered faintly, a ghost of yesterday's fire that refused to leave. I hung my coat, careful to tuck the envelope with the pressed flower deep inside my bag, and stepped into the kitchen. Evelyn stood at the counter slicing pears with a deliberate grace. Her silk blouse gleamed like a warning. She turned at the sound of my footsteps, her smile bright enough to hide a knife. "You were out early," she said, voice sugar smooth. "Errands?" "Just a few things," I replied, keeping my tone light. My heart still beat with the lawyer's words, but I forced my expression into calm neutrality. "Lovely day for a drive," she said, eyes lingering on me a fraction too long. "Your father mentioned you've been distracted. Everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I answered, offering the smallest smile. I could almost hear Mom's steady voice in my head. "Don't give her what she wants." Evelyn's gaze sharpened, a flicker of irritation behind the practiced charm. "Good. We all need harmony in this house." She wiped her hands on a linen towel and glided past me, leaving the faint trace of her expensive perfume, sharp, floral, and cold. When the sound of her heels faded, I exhaled slowly. I knew now that Evelyn thrived on confrontation. If I gave her open defiance, she'd twist my words until Dad doubted every memory we shared. She was too skilled at turning conflict into leverage. So I chose silence, but it was an active silence, the kind that waits and watches. I replayed Mr. Collins's advice. Keep records, stay patient, like a mantra. I moved through the house with deliberate ease, straightening pillows, watering the fern by the parlor window, all the while cataloging every detail. The scorched cedar chest, the photographs on the mantel, the way Evelyn's perfume still clung to the curtains. These would become part of my quiet evidence. By evening, the sky outside burned rose and violet. I stood at the window, watching the shadows lengthen across the yard. Inside, something within me hardened into a vow. I would uncover every secret Mom left behind. And I would move carefully, so carefully, that Evelyn would never see me coming until it was too late. 2 mornings later, a soft drizzle glazed the fields, turning the gravel drive slick and dark. I slipped into my car and headed toward the neighboring town where Margaret lived. Mom had called her the sister I chose, and I'd known Margaret all my life. If anyone could help me untangle the meaning of Box 12, it was her. Her small white cottage smelled of lavender and would polish the moment she opened the door. "Lucy," she said, drawing me into a hug that carried the warmth of old summers. "You look tired. Come in, dear." We settled in her cozy living room where a fire snapped quietly. Shelves of well-loved books lined the walls, and a crocheted throw blanket rested across the arm of the couch. So familiar it almost hurt. I told her everything. The fire, the cedar chest reduced to ash, the pressed flower with its faint scrawl of Box 12. As I spoke, Margaret's kind face shifted from shock to a deep, simmering sadness. "That woman," she said softly, meaning Evelyn. "Your mother trusted me with a lot of confidence. But this? I didn't know she feared something like this might happen." I held the fragile flower out to her. "Do you have any idea what Box 12 could mean?" Margaret's eyes widened with recognition, then softened with memory. "Years ago, Clara mentioned leaving a letter that speaks when I cannot. She said it was for a time when her voice might be taken. I thought she was being poetic, but maybe she was planning this all along." The words tightened my chest with both grief and awe. Mom had prepared for Evelyn. Had prepared for me. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Your mother was clever and fiercely protective. If she left you a trail, Lucy, it means she believed you would find it. Keep following." The fire popped, sending a small shower of sparks up the chimney. I felt a quiet resolve settle inside me, a warmth stronger than the drizzle outside. "Thank you," I said, tucking the pressed flower back into its envelope. "I won't stop until I know everything she wanted me to find." Margaret smiled, eyes shining. "Good girl. Clara would be proud." The next evening I found Evelyn waiting in the kitchen, a stack of crisp papers neatly fanned across the counter. A thin smile curved her lips. "Lucy," she said smoothly, "we should simplify the estate. It'll save taxes and headaches later. All you need to do is co-sign these forms. Your father will thank you." I dried my hands on a towel, forcing a calm I didn't quite feel. "What exactly are they?" "Routine documents," she said, tapping the top page with a manicured nail. "Just a formality to make sure the house transfers easily. Eventually." I scanned the dense paragraphs. Legal terms twisted like vines, thick and unreadable. Something in the phrasing made my stomach tighten. "I'll need time to read them carefully," I said. Her smile stiffened. "It's straightforward. Then you won't mind if I take a few days." A flicker of irritation flashed across her eyes before she smoothed it away. "Of course," she said lightly, but the words were a shade too sweet. I gathered the papers and tucked them under my arm, careful to hide the pounding of my heart. I could almost hear her thoughts clicking behind that poised face, trying to guess what I already knew, that this was no harmless paperwork. As I left the kitchen, the scent of her expensive perfume trailed after me, sharp and cold. Upstairs in my room I slid the documents into a drawer, locking it with a small brass key of my own. Let her wonder. The more she pushed, the clearer her intentions became. Mom's clues had warned me. Patience would be my strongest weapon, and I intended to wield it well. Determined to crack the meaning of Box 12, I drove to the old town library where Mom had spent countless afternoons volunteering. The records room smelled of lemon polish and paper, a quiet sanctuary from the autumn chill outside. I combed through dusty drawers until I found a slim binder of safety deposit sign-outs. My pulse quickened when I spotted her familiar signature. Clara Whitman, Community Bank, Box 12, dated just 2 weeks before she died. A bank box. Something Evelyn couldn't have reached. I jotted the details and hurried out, my breath fogging in the cold. The letters might be gone, but Mom's voice waited somewhere inside that box. Now I only needed the key. The next morning I stepped into the marble-floored lobby of the community bank. The air smelled faintly of wax and polished brass. I need access to Box 12 registered under Clara Whitman, I told the clerk. He typed for a moment and nodded. Yes, we have that on record. May I see your key and ID? My heart sank. I don't have the key. I'm afraid we can't grant entry without it, he said with polite regret. Outside, the wind cut through my coat. Mom had hidden the key, and she'd hidden it for me to find. Later that day I shared the problem with Margaret over steaming mugs of tea. She tapped a finger thoughtfully on the table. Lucy, remember your old violin? Clara once said the music of truth rests where the music of life began. The words rang like a bell. My childhood violin case still sat in the attic. That night I climbed the creaky ladder, flashlight in hand. Beneath a quilt lay the black violin case, its velvet lining faded but familiar. Running my fingers along the edge, I felt a tiny bump. I peeled back the fabric and gasped. A small brass key glinted in the beam, and beside it a folded note in Mom's script, for when fire tries to silence love. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed the note to my chest. Mom had hidden the truth in music. The next morning I returned to the bank, heart racing. The key slid perfectly into the lock. Inside the narrow box rested a single sealed envelope bound with a faded blue ribbon. My name stretched across the front in Mom's elegant handwriting, followed by, "And to anyone who dares erase our memories." I opened it in a quiet booth, eyes drinking in each line. Her words were powerful, proof of her love and a safeguard for everything she cherished. The details would change everything, but I held them close for now, letting the strength of her voice steady me. When I stepped through the farmhouse door that evening, Evelyn's voice sliced the air. Your father says you've been distracted. Are you feeling unstable? I met her gaze. I'm fine. You should rest. Maybe talk to someone, she said, sweetness dripping like poison. She was planting seeds of doubt in Dad's mind, hoping to isolate me. I offered a calm smile. Thanks for the concern. Inside I burned, but Mom's letter anchored me. Evelyn could whisper all she wanted. I now held the truth. Later Dad found me on the porch, his brow furrowed. Lucy, Evelyn says you've been forgetful. Maybe even volatile. Is something wrong? I drew a slow breath. Dad, I need you to watch, not just listen. Please. He studied me for a long moment, eyes softening. All right. I'll pay attention. Relief flickered through me. Maybe he wasn't fully under her spell. Through the window I caught a glimpse of Evelyn's silhouette behind the curtain, a shadow waiting to strike. But she had no idea I was already 2 steps ahead. The next morning I drove back to Mr. Collins's office with the sealed letter tucked safely in my bag. His office smelled faintly of leather and old paper, the kind of place that made secrets feel at home. He greeted me warmly, but his eyes sharpened as I described Evelyn's fire, the pressed flower clue, and the bank discovery. When I slid the letter across his desk, he read it carefully, his eyebrows lifting higher with each line. "Lucy," he said finally, "this is powerful. Your mother stated that if her personal letters were ever destroyed intentionally, all assets tied to the farmhouse transferred directly to you." A quiet strength settled over me. "Can we protect it?" "Absolutely," he replied. "I'll prepare a trust and make certified copies. Keep the original secure, and reveal nothing until we're ready." As I left, the sun broke through the gray clouds, a silent sign that Mom's plan was already working, and that Evelyn's grip was slipping. With the trust in motion, I set the next stage. I invited family and close neighbors for a casual Saturday dinner, careful to include Evelyn. "It'll be wonderful to have everyone together," I said lightly. Her eyes narrowed for a beat before she offered a brittle smile. "Lovely idea." That evening I called Mr. Collins and asked him and a notary to stop by after dessert. "I want witnesses," I explained. He understood without another question. During the following days I stayed calm, almost cheerful. Evelyn mistook my quiet for surrender, unaware that each polite word was another step toward her undoing. The dinner arrived on a crisp evening scented with roasting herbs and apple cider. Laughter warmed the old farmhouse as cousins and neighbors filled the rooms with easy chatter. Evelyn glided through the crowd in a deep green dress, her smile a little too sharp. Over wine she began to brag. "This old place will shine once I modernize it," she told a relative. "I've already gotten rid of so much old junk." A hush followed. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. I caught Dad's startled expression and held his gaze. Something in his eyes shifted. Doubt. Maybe realization. Evelyn quickly changed the subject, but the slip hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. When the plates were cleared, I stood by the fireplace, my mother's letter warm in my hands. "There's something I need to share," I said. The room quieted. "This is from my mother," I continued. "She wrote it for me, and for anyone who tried to erase her memory." I read aloud. Her words filled the room with a calm power, blessing me with love and declaring that if her letters were ever destroyed by intent, the farmhouse and all assets passed to me alone. Gasps rippled through the gathering. I looked at Evelyn. Her face drained of color. Mr. Collins stepped forward, voice firm. "This letter is valid and witnessed today. Its instructions are legally binding." Evelyn sputtered. "This is outrageous. Fabricated." But the notary confirmed its authenticity, and the guests murmured as the truth settled around us. Dad turned to Evelyn, disbelief darkening his eyes. "You burned the letters?" She faltered. "They were just clutter." "No," he said quietly. "They were Clara's heart." The farmhouse seemed to breathe again, as if Mom herself stood beside me. Evelyn's power, once sharp as a knife, dulled to nothing. Silence stretched after Dad's quiet accusation. I could hear only the ticking of the old clock on the mantel and the faint crackle from the fireplace. Dad inhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering as though a heavy weight had slipped away. "Lucy is right," he said at last, turning toward the gathered neighbors and relatives. "This farmhouse belongs to her." A warm surge of relief filled me. For the first time since Mom died, Dad stood beside me without hesitation. Evelyn's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, but found none. Friends avoided her gaze. Cousins studied their shoes. The truth had settled like an unexpected storm, washing away her carefully built charm. I met her stare and held it until she looked away. A week later we stood in the small-town courthouse. The old wood benches creaked as we waited for the judge. Light streamed through high windows, catching the dust in golden shafts. Mr. Collins presented the deed, the trust, and Mom's letter. I spoke only when asked, each word measured and steady. Evelyn tried to claim the fire was an accident, but photographs of the scorched cedar chest and her own careless brag at dinner unraveled her defense. The judge tapped his gavel. The farmhouse and all inherited assets belong solely to Lucy Whitman. The sound echoed like final punctuation. Evelyn's influence dissolved in that quiet thud. 3 days later Evelyn appeared at the farmhouse door. No makeup, eyes shadowed, she seemed smaller somehow. "Lucy," she said softly, "we can talk. I never meant to hurt you. Can we find reason?" Memories of smoke and ashes rushed back. "You didn't just burn paper," I said evenly. "You burned trust. That can't be rebuilt." Her lips trembled, but she had no reply. She turned and walked to her car, the crunch of gravel the only sound as dusk settled around us. Neighbors gathered quietly the next morning as Evelyn carried suitcases to her sedan. The late autumn sun gilded the maple trees, their last leaves whispering in the breeze. Dad stood beside me, his hand warm on my shoulder. Evelyn paused once, perhaps waiting for someone to call her back. No one did. She closed the car door, started the engine, and disappeared down the long dirt road without a wave. The farmhouse exhaled a long, peaceful silence. For the first time in years, it felt like home. That evening Dad and I sat by the fireplace where Mom once read bedtime stories. The flames danced, casting gentle light on the old stone hearth. I unfolded Mom's letter and read it again, every line a steady heartbeat. Love cannot be burned. Dad reached for my hand. "She'd be proud of you," he said. I believed him. The farmhouse walls seemed to glow with quiet warmth, as if Mom's spirit filled every beam and stone. The letter lived on, stronger than fire, stronger than lies, and in that soft light, our family, what remained of it, was whole again.